All right, guys, what's up? Welcome to Mercedes Masterclass episode 2, the series where I sit inside of my Mercedes in a parking lot and talk to you about things and teach you how to do stuff. Today's episode, we are going to be talking about spreadsheet learning, a strategy where you can actually learn from your mistakes in a really time-efficient way, and it lets you learn a whole lot of stuff. All right, let's get right to it. All right, guys, so what actually is spreadsheet learning? Well, it is a really simple process where we are basically just using an Excel sheet. What we want to do is practically just make a column, so 3 columns rather. This is a strategy that is really applicable for all mistakes that you may make in your study journey, but I would like to actually go through and break through kind of like section by section on cars specifically, how I used this strategy to help boost my learning and figure out where my content knowledge gaps were, and a lot of other kind of like statistical things that I found about my mistakes. All right, so here's a pretty basic look at what your Excel or other spreadsheet should look like. Just basically 3 columns, just like I have here, what I got wrong, why I got it wrong, and what I'll do next time. So the big idea about spreadsheet learning is 1, basically comprehensively understanding what we got wrong, why, and what will change. So this is like a comprehensive kind of like cognitive realization of a really big context around your mistake and what you should do in the future. Now, how can we apply that further? Well, when you get into the bulk of your studies, you're actually going to be writing down a lot, like tens to hundreds of mistakes at times, like especially for the MCAT, that's how it goes. So what I personally found really helpful when using spreadsheet learning was actually just going through and using the whole spreadsheet almost like a big set of flashcards. And by that, I mean to say that when we set up our spreadsheet and put in all of our information initially, we are obviously going to forget a lot of the stuff that we put on the spreadsheet. So what I came up with to kind of get around that is using like the forgetting curve and at certain time intervals going back, obviously reviewing everything. But more than that, it is kind of looking at perhaps key things inside of your specific columns and then trying to recall perhaps the mistake that you made before and why it was wrong. Or we can go the other way. What was the mistake that we made initially and how do we get to the right answer? And that way, it's kind of like a big set of flashcards that really makes you think about the context of all of your questions and why you got them wrong. And when you practice this on or in line with your forgetting curve, the forgetting curve being obviously like the amount of time that it takes you to forget information, we start to practice active recall. And this really boosts our ability to see things on the MCAT or another test and then really call back to the spreadsheet itself. And we have some sort of visual memory going on. We have like this memory web incorporated in here due to the spreadsheet nature. And all in all, it seems like, at least in my opinion, a very decent success strategy for using spreadsheet learning to genuinely take in a massive amount of information in not a crazy amount of time, at least in terms of problem-solving skills overall. What's more than that is that we can also figure out whether our mistakes are more intrinsic or whether they are more extrinsic. By that I mean, are they content-based, extrinsic, like not dealing with you, stuff that you do not know, or are our issues more intrinsic, so pertinent to us? By that, an example could be potentially we're reading our question stem too fast and missing words, or it could also be we are misreading the passage and other issues similar to that. Now, let's cover the MCAT topics kind of on a one-by-one basis and go through how we can apply the spreadsheet learning tactic to each of them. All right, so first I want to start with the Chem Phys section, but due to the fact that Chem Phys is actually really similar to the Biochem section in terms of problem solving and the types of problems and applications that we see, I'm going to cover Chem Phys and Biochem in kind of the same way here. So when we do our what I got wrong, what I would suggest doing is actually copying and pasting the entire question stem into this section here. That makes it kind of like where you can remember exactly what the question was talking about and the context surrounding it. When we talk about why I got it wrong, this is the section where we really want to look at our incorrect answer and the explanation with it. We want to really read through that and internalize it, and we want to compare it against the correct answer and the correct answer's explanation. So the most pertinent things to write down in why I got it wrong is going to be, it could be some really general overarching type of explanation, like I didn't know what X was, and here's the definition of X. Stuff like that. Make it really tailor-made to your specific question, and as long as you're finding out exactly what you got wrong, explaining why you got it wrong, and then fixing it here, then you are doing pretty good. What I like to do in the what I'll do next time section is really just, it could be a summary of why I got it wrong, or it could be a further explanation. It is really the case here where we have a lot of leeway to play with what we want to do. And oftentimes it works out that whatever you do to float your boat, is going to make you the most successful. So I really suggest playing around with it and seeing what style you like to do stuff in, while keeping this general 3-column format. In the same exact way as Chem Phys and Biochem, the Psych-Soc section is actually very, very easy to, in my opinion, easy to identify your mistakes in. Oftentimes it's going to be practically strictly knowledge-based. You didn't know the definition of the fundamental attribution error, and that's why you got the question wrong. Well, that makes it really easy for us, doesn't it? But the same general principle is going to apply that we talked about before. What I got wrong, I would heavily recommend writing in the question stem just so we have the context of the question that we were actually answering and what we got wrong. When it asks what I got wrong or why I got it wrong, we're going to talk about potentially that we didn't know the definition of something, or we misattributed something, or potentially it was something intrinsic too, like we misread the question, or something else extrinsic, really, really contextually based to what your mistake was. Again, figure out what it was, why you got it wrong, and why the correct answer is correct. That is as far as that we necessarily need to go for why I got it wrong. Again, in the what I'll do next time section, I personally like to really summarize what I got wrong, especially for Psych-Soc. So I will put in definitions here, specifically, of stuff that I need to remember. And that way, it makes it really clean and clear when I go through and review my spreadsheet here, that it makes it really easy to study. Now, when we get to the cars section is where we can get really, really specific about how we can use spreadsheet learning. And this is really where we're going to see, in my opinion, the most statistical use of spreadsheet learning on your Excel sheet in general. And it's not quite going to function like the other 3 sections that we just talked about, at least in terms of studying along a forgetting curve. Because how do you actually use a forgetting curve for cars? Well, it's not applicable, because it's not like we're studying specific content or passages or knowledge. Cars does not require any of that. So the way that we use spreadsheet learning necessarily has to differ. And the only things that are different is that we're not actually going to care about specifically, like specific questions, what we got wrong. More or less what we're looking for is essentially the types of mistakes that we are making. And we are going to find what types of mistakes we are making through doing our 3-step process. And then it makes it really easy to tally up what mistakes we're making and really find like a statistical kind of like spread of information about what mistakes we're making. And that lets us move forward and try to fix our process in the future. So here's a little more in depth on cars. The way I would do this is what I got wrong. What I like to do is I like to keep it very general. It's not specific question stems, it's the skeleton. For example, what I got wrong, let's say here's an example stem here. The author supports X. Infer how they would feel about Y. Notice what I've done here is I've kept essentially the skeleton of the question. This is important because we basically can see general types of question stems and we can potentially find out if we're having trouble on a certain type of question. This is a very analytical process that we have to be very, very cognitive of in our problem-solving process. We don't want to put in any extraneous information, so that's why I say X and that's why I say Y. All of that information is not important to us because the passages are constantly going to be changing, but the question skeletons are going to be reoccurring. So this is necessarily, my car timed out, this is necessarily what we need to focus on. Now, when we move on to why I got it wrong, basically what we're doing here is figuring out what we can attribute our incorrect answer to. We want to read through why our incorrect answer is incorrect, really understand what our incorrect answer means, and then compare it against the correct answer and what the correct answer means and why exactly it is correct. I got to emphasize that this is a very mentally intense process if you are doing it correctly. It is essentially really important that we really take our time when we do cars review. This is really important because studying cars is really necessarily a mentally intense process if you're doing it the right way. Cars, at least studying cars and figuring out what your incorrect answer is essentially a deep dive into the mindset of the test takers or the test makers and your mindset. And we got to figure out exactly where the kind of like the disconnect is there and in why you got it wrong. So oftentimes the reason you got some of these questions wrong is because you're not in the headspace of the author writing the passage, you're not in the headspace of the test makers, and it's all up to us to actually review what we got wrong and to really think about it. So this process should be mentally intense and it should take you the longest of the other topics that we talked about. When we talk about what it will do next time, it's really important that we actually go ahead and write down specifically, as a kind of like in your best guess, what mistake you made, kind of like as a one sentence type of thing. Like, for example, we can say, I misidentified the main idea. That's just one example. It could also be, it could be X or it could be Y. It could be a lot of things about why we got it wrong. But the big idea is that we just put in as a general idea why we got the question wrong in a one sentence type of format. I find that helps me the best because then when we go through and we actually kind of like analyze our mistakes, we can think about tallying up what type of mistakes we're making on, say, a whiteboard like I have, and then we figure out where the biggest causes of our issues are when we're solving cars questions. From there, we can do strategy changes. We can talk about a lot of things context dependent on what we are necessarily getting wrong. Well, guys, that has been episode 2 of Mercedes Masterclass, the series where I sit in my Mercedes and talk about things and teach you how to do things. Obviously, just episode 2, so I'm just starting out, but For any of you who may have found me so early into my little series here, I really appreciate you watching, and I hope you took something away from the video. I really hope you have a good night. Bye, guys.